Right, well, good morning and welcome to the second meeting of the City of Edinburgh Council Leith-Links and Surplus Fire Fund Bill Committee. I'd like to remind members and other people in the room to turn off mobile phones and other electronic devices as they may interfere with our sound equipment. No apologies have been received. So the first item on the agenda is to decide whether to take item 3, the committee's further consideration of its approach to the bill in private, and whether consideration of its draft preliminary stage report to be taken in private at future meetings. Do we wish to take item 3 in private? Thank you very much. And do we wish to consider our draft report in private at future meetings? Thank you very much. Now I move to item 2 of the agenda this morning. I would like to welcome the panel of witnesses today for the Leith-Links provision of this bill, and we are welcoming Ian Buchanan, who's City Centre and Leith Neighbourhood Manager of the City of Edinburgh Council. Good morning. Charles Livingston, Associate from Brodie's Solicitors. Good morning. And Mrs Pat Densler, Chair of the John Rattray Statute Committee of Leith Rules Golf Society. Good morning to you as well. Should I probably declare an interest as a former employee of Brodie's, which is noted on my register of interests? I'm going to move straight to questions. At the end of the questions, there will be an opportunity for you to add anything which you feel has not been covered this morning through our questions. So the first question that I would like to begin with is whether the panel could outline the background to this statute, including how the statute is going to be funded and maintained, particularly if the extra fundraising mentioned in the memorandum is not successful, where that additional funding is going to come from, the choice of sculptor, landscape designer and any other feedback which the Leith Rules Golf Society has received from the local community.
Thank you. The background to the statute is when I first went to Leith in business, I was amazed that Leith had this extraordinary history in the background to golf, that golf had been played on Leith-Links, and that the first written rules of golf were drawn up for play on Leith-Links in 1744 and recorded in the archives of the City of Edinburgh, and also on the minute book of the Honourable Company of Edinburgh Golfers. So I thought this was tremendously exciting, but there wasn't a lot to realise that that had happened, and I thought that was a real missed opportunity. Leith has a lot of history, but this was one I found particularly interesting. The Society was formed in 2002, and that was really to increase recognition of Leith as the home or the cradle of the first recorded written rules of golf. And we opened then in line with the Open that took place in 2002, because that's the continuous link of the Leith golfers who went to Musselburgh and then on to Muirfield and Gullen. And we wanted some iconic image, really, after we opened the links each year for golf on Leith-Links with hickory clubs. And that's quite popular. In July each year for 4 days, the city allows us to open up the links. And we also have an open competition. And the Leith golfers have always had open competitions, so it allows people from all walks of life to take part. Originally, they had to pay a certain fee. The aim was to have something really iconic to represent Leith, and what would be iconic, and we felt a statue of a golfer would be, but which golfer? And Rattray was a very colourful character. Rattray was a surgeon, he was an archer, he was working in Edinburgh, having come from Perthshire, and the archers had a silver arrow, which they competed for, that the city had provided. So they approached the City Fathers, the Borough Council of Edinburgh at that time, to see if they would provide a silver club. They agreed to provide this silver club, but the condition was they drew up a set of rules. So these 13 rules were drawn up in 1744 on 7th March, and the match was played in April. And the winner was John Rattray, who became captain of the golf and also had to affix a piece of silver to the silver club. This tradition has continued. You no longer have to play to get it, but the captain has always to affix a piece of silver, and they're now, I understand, on their 4th silver club. And this is really quite iconic. The city has provided each of these clubs down the years. Rattray he played in 1744 and won, he played in 1745 and won, but 1745 was quite a disruptive time. I'm sure you all know in Scotland, Rattray was a Jacobite, and a surgeon. So he was asked to tend the troops at Preston Pans, which he did. He obviously did it much too well, because he was then asked to accompany the Bonnie Prince Charlie's troops and went south to Derby and then up to Culloden. He was captured, taken prisoner, and only released from the good services of the Lord President of Scotland, Lord Duncan Forbes of Culloden. So he got out again to play again and won again in 1751. So we thought this is a fantastic story. There's quite a bit of background to the golfers, how they used to meet in Lucky Cliffin's tavern, and it was obviously quite a social thing in the area. So we thought this is a wonderful, iconic figure, and we thought if we could really get that up on the links somewhere. We thought about urban locations, but really the golfers were on the links, so it was the links that the Society really wanted to have the statue on. And then we discovered there was this restriction on what could be put up on Leith-Links. So I don't know if that's enough of background to start you with.
That's fascinating, yeah, incredible knowledge, yeah. Okay, thank you. In terms of the funding and the maintenance of the statue going forward?
See, the city personnel responsible for that is Paul. I've forgotten his second name at the moment, but apparently there is a tradition of the capital cost of the statue. You then take between 10 and 15% as a capital sum to give to the city for the ongoing maintenance of the statue. I understand that's what is normal procedure for looking after statues, and that would be what we would intend to do.
Right. And in terms of the particular location, I mean, I heard what you said about the location during your opening remarks here, about the choice of the sculpture as well. I mean, can you give us some background on that?
Yes, we did look at the Canongate Kirk, and there's a very attractive sculpture of Robert Ferguson, which has a lot of life and movement in it. And we thought that's really the sort of thing we want. And David Annand is a Fife sculptor, but he works with Powder Hall Bronze Works. And he was very helpful, and he came and explained to the Society how bronze is made, exactly what happens. And we commissioned him to do a maquette of a figure. And we worked closely then with the archivist from the Royal Burgess Society to get the sort of swing and style that they had in the 18th century. And we had that maquette drawn up. And I have that on, we have a fundraising brochure drawn up through the summer, and that's on there. I'd be happy to pass some of these leaflets around to you, or leave them for after. I don't know if you want to have them just now. And sorry, what was your other question?
I mean, you touched on this during your opening sort of comments about the choice of location. I mean, the reason you picked the particular.
Yes, we worked with CICL, which is Cairns Intersphere Consulting Limited, Bill Cairns there. We paced round the links. We worked out which, the background to what has the most, they talked about the rootedness or the best location that we could find that represented what we were trying to show, where the golfers had been, where you might reasonably have played the golf shot. So the site is actually on part of the first hole, although it's facing up the way instead of down the way, and tried to get somewhere which had reasonable oversight, but that obviously on a park is always one of the tricky bits to get.
What sort of feedback have you had from the community in terms of the position and choice of location?
We've worked closely with the councillors in Leith, even during the change of councillors, and found them very supportive. And we also had, I go along, or one of our members of our team attend the Leith Steering Group meetings, and have found everybody there very supportive, including the Historic Society. So we feel there is good support. We also open the links, as I said, each year for 4 days in July, and people are free to come and ask us anything about it, and we always have as much information as we can available there.
Okay. This leaflet's very useful. Can you tell us how your fundraising efforts have been going? I appreciate you may not be able to do so, but if you're able to give us any background in terms of how it's progressing.
Good local support, and people are very encouraging, and we have had some modest donations in already from individuals. We obviously need to be sure we can go ahead with the project before we approach trusts, and I think trusts will probably be the main source of funding. That while people in business are very keen, they don't see the immediate payback. They say, yes, long term, it will be great for the area. It will encourage tourists. We have a hotelier on our team, and he's been talking to one of the tour groups, and we've tried to assess Whether it would be included in a tour, well, it might be, but nobody's going to commit yet at this stage. But he did say visitors are coming to his hotel and visiting more and more in Leith. Now, whether that's Sunshine on Leith that's helped that or other backgrounds, we are very hopeful that we will be able to raise the funds.
And can you remind me how much you need to raise? How much money do you need to allow this project to move forward?
The statue itself is 42,000, which means about 50,000 by the time you've VAT and the donation to the city. But overall, the full project could cost as much as 250,000 because of the earthworks and any interpretive panels. But it depends how much we are able to do in that respect.
Okay, thank you very much. Do either of you, gentlemen, have anything to add to that very comprehensive analysis? No?
The Leith-Links steering group that Pat Densler referred to is a group of council officers, elected members, local councillors, local groups, like Pat Densler's group, that come together for the benefit of Leith-Links, looking at how Leith-Links can be developed, how it can be improved, assessing the current maintenance. So it's quite a broad group of people that come together in that group on a quarterly basis.
Thank you. I think the next question was from Sandra.
Yes, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Following up from the convener's questions, particularly in regard to the funding and what's been raised. The first question I wanted to ask, I believe the bill went through Council in April 2013, and I just wonder what factors were considered in the timing of the introduction of the bill. Is the timescale of the bill, what factors were introduced at that particular time?
I think the main driver for the timing of the bill was originally the Open being at Muirfield in 2013, but then it wasn't possible to get everything in order, consultation done, and the bill introduced in time for that. So now the timetable is the principal driver is the Ryder Cup, and I think that's chiefly for the purposes of profile raising and assisting with fundraising. In terms of the process from the Council agreeing to pursue the bill, there are obviously a number of tasks that have to be gone through before a private bill can be introduced in terms of consultation and notification. So there was a certain period of time that was required for those. The other part of the bill, the Surplus Fire Fund bill, was introduced after the Leith-Links proposal had been set in motion, so that the Council took the view that it would be a more efficient use of funds and the Parliament's time to have both elements in the same bill. So there was then obviously additional consultation that had to be carried out in relation to that, bill drafting, preparation of documents, etc. So the consultation and notification documents were ready towards the end of 2012, so into mid-November, late November. And then the consultation period ran until the 7th of January. And that was with a view to getting the resolution that has to be given under Section 82 of the Local Government Scotland Act 1973. A local authority has to resolve to introduce a bill before it can do that. So the consultation had to end and the results of that be processed before a report could go to Council to vote on that. The aim was to get the vote at the 31st of January Council meeting, and that was driven by wanting to get the private bill in good time to allow the process to be gone through and the construction to start in time for the statue to be ready for the Ryder Cup next year. So that's an overview of the timetable.
Thank you very much. And it's quite obvious that the driver, if you pardon the pun, was the Ryder Cup coming up because of the publicity, etc. I know my other colleagues are going to ask more about consultation and obviously other parts of the bill, such as the FBU and the Fire Brigade part of the bill. Just to carry on the theme of regarding what the convener was talking about the estimated costs. I noticed you said £250,000 would be the cost, and I think it was £42,000 for the statue. Can you give us any timescale where you think you may have reached this point of raising this amount of money?
That's quite a hard one to estimate because there's been so much delay that to start the fundraising, well, we started slowly, but to go hard on the fundraising, we need to be absolutely certain that we can build. So the Ryder Cup's a tough one, but it does help to have a focus to go for Ryder Cup. Golf has something happening almost every year, and clearly it may be that the Ryder Cup gives us a better area to promote it. There are more golfers and more things about golf, because if we can't start cutting the turf by the 1st of April, then, pardon me, it wouldn't be grown and ready by September when the Ryder Cup takes place. So it could be we have to fundraise through 2014 on the back of the Ryder Cup and look realistically at the following year for getting it up. But as I say, if you don't on fundraising really push and say we must have it by now, then you can't encourage people to give.
Could I ask maybe an impertinent question? I don't know which way you may take it. You know, how much money has been raised to date?
We're at the moment about 40,000 of the 250,000. That includes the contribution from the city, because our fundraiser, we got some pro bono advice from a fundraiser who's worked on quite a lot of big projects. And she said, put absolutely everything in, because if you don't put the maximum, it's very hard to go back and say, terribly sorry, we didn't actually estimate quite enough. So we have put in the pro bono accounts and also what the city has put in as part of it, as well as the actual hard cash that's come in.
So I would say that obviously, you know, to get it ready for the Ryder Cup and raise enough for the £25,000, obviously you only have the year to do that. If you were unable to raise that amount of money, would you continue? Or?
You mean into a following year?
Yes.
Yes, indeed. Oh, yes, I think we did start in 2010. The Leith-Links Golf Society agreed to go ahead with the project. We already had the maquette. So it has taken longer than expected to get to this stage, but there's no reason for them to stop continuing. Their aim is to get it there eventually, but we're trying to put it into a timescale that's realistic and people can really work towards.
Can I just ask one more question, Chair? Thank you very much. In regard to the maintenance of the statue, which the convener had already mentioned, obviously that would be ongoing. Is that included in the £250,000?
Yes, yes. We estimate that overall the statue is 50,000 to include a sum to go to the city as a capital sum for them then to take over maintenance. Okay,
thank you, Chair. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment. Okay, thanks, Chair.
Bruce, do you have a question?
What a fascinating story John Rattray is. Sounds like the beginning of a plot for a new John Robertson historical novel when you wrap around all the stuff around Jacobite leanings. I want to deal with some of the more technical aspects of the bill, as we're required as a committee to satisfy ourselves that there is no other mechanism that could have been used other than this legislative route of the private bill. It's one of the requirements of the Parliament. The memorandum to the bill states that primary legislation is needed to amend the 1991 Act or to authorise the construction of the statute itself. But can I firstly, though, ask you to outline in more detail the reasons for the Council deciding to follow the route of the private bill, and secondly, why this particular legal approach was taken to address the obvious legal obstacles that exist, and why you didn't consider a different approach that was already been taken in regard, for instance, to the National Gallery, or to the extension to the National Gallery when that happened in Princess Street.
Sorry, could I just check the first part of that question? So the second part was the legal approach, for example, the National Gallery.
Just why you didn't choose that route, and why you've chosen this particular route in terms of a private bill.
Well, because there is a restriction in private legislation on the construction of, technically it's buildings, but that includes monuments. There's a restriction on building on Leith-Links. There are certain categories of buildings that are permitted, but monuments is not one of them. So there is really no way that the statue could be constructed without some primary legislation that either expressly or implicitly amends that restriction. So we've gone for the route of an express amendment to create an exception to the general restriction, so as to permit this particular statute. An alternative implicit route would be to seek primary legislation that authorised the statute, and that would be in conflict with the 91 Act, but the later legislation would take precedence. In terms of other potential amendments, it would have been possible to add monuments to the list of permitted categories of building for Leith-Links, but I think the council didn't want to add a general exception there, because this discussion was really about this statute, not about statues and monuments in general. So the council decided against that option. And also there was the possibility of the National Gallery style approach. But really, the reason that approach was taken in relation to the National Gallery, which was to simply take a slice of the eastern Princes Street Gardens and say that that was no longer Princes Street Gardens, so that the National Gallery could be built out onto it. I think that works for a project like that, because that area of land simply is no longer park, it is now building. The project here, although there's a statue going on to Leith-Links, but the area is still park land. So if one was to exempt a particular part of Leith-Links from the definition of Leith-Links, it wouldn't just be the restriction on monuments that would fall away in respect to that parkland. And I think the council wanted to create the narrower exception, so as not to take an area of Leith-Links and potentially open it up to, at least in legal terms, open it up to any development. So the council decided against that approach.
Yeah, that sounds quite logical in terms of the way you described that. In terms of the wording of the Act itself under Section 1, it says that nothing in subsection 1 prohibits the construction of the monument and Leith-Links consisting of the statue of John Rattray, etc. But it doesn't stipulate where in Leith-Links in terms of legislation as well. If we wanted to be more restrictive, would it not have been the approach to actually have defined in the amendment or in this particular piece of legislation exactly where the monument was going to be located?
That would have been a more restrictive approach. It's not the approach that the council decided on. I think the thinking there was that there should be a little bit of well, I can't speak for the council, because I'm not sure that option was part of the report that went to council for the vote. But I think it makes sense to do it that way, because there is then a flexibility about the citing of the statute. I know there will be separate questions about the consultation, but the consultation reflected that in terms of encompassing the entire perimeter of Leith-Links, not just the area in question. It may be worth explaining, though, that planning permission has been granted just in respect of the location for which the statue is planned.
That in itself, well, it's not a guarantee, because another application could come in, but
exactly.
In the current situation, it provides some certainty about where exactly it would be. Yes,
it's the area that's proposed is the only area where planning permission has been granted for the statue. And of course, the council retains effectively the right to permit or not permit the statue, because this bill, of course, does not authorise the society to actually construct the statue. So as owner of the property, the council's permission would still be required to go onto the land and do the landscaping works and install the statue, etc.
So one other small question, not related to that specifically, but next door to where the statue is going to be is the bowling club area. Whose ownership and control is the bowling club area? Do we know?
I don't know that.
It's the council's.
It is the council. I suspected that was the case. I couldn't see anything to identify it, because we took a little visit down just to make sure we knew what was going on. So, thank you very much.
Can I just go back to that point about the location of the statute and the albeit unlikely possibility of it being moved. I mean, does the council or can the council foresee of any circumstances, or what the circumstances might be, where you might need to consider shifting it and indeed applying for permission again to shift it?
I can only speak for myself. I don't foresee that circumstance arising. The consultation feedback that we have hasn't expressed a particular interest or problem with that location or desire to have it in any other location. One of the advantages of that location is it suits the John Rattray Society's needs, but it also suits the needs of the use of Leith-Links because it doesn't interfere with any of the existing play provision. It's compatible with the use of the links. So it's a good location.
Thanks. And do you have...
Yeah, thank you, Convener, and thank you, Ms Densler. That was a beautiful, true story of our history. Thank you very much. It was extremely eloquent. But back to some of the techie questions that I think you may well have thought you've answered already, but just to pick up on it and drill down. It really is about the notification, and I'm really just trying to determine what ground rules did you set to determine the affected persons, and what sources of information was used to ascertain the identity of such persons?
The notification process, the ground rules that were set, I assume we're just talking about the letters that were sent out to people, to residents, and not the newspaper adverts or anything like that.
Well, that would be helpful to know of all of it. That there had been public meetings held, there was writing to particular bodies, and obviously there was 400 residents contacted. So it would be helpful to put on record.
Okay, I'll start with the consultation. Well, I'll start at the beginning chronologically. It's maybe easiest. So the public information evenings were arranged for Wednesday the 19th of December in relation to the Leith-Links proposals, which was in the Thomas Morton Hall, which is in the area. There was another public information evening on the 20th of December in relation to the fund proposals, and that was at Edinburgh City Chambers. And the information about those are in the promoter's memorandum. The letters to consultees had gone out in advance of those meetings, so that consultees had notice of the meetings. The fund proposals letters were sent out on the 23rd of November, and there's a list of recipients at paragraph 24 of the promoter's memorandum. Would you like me to cover those?
Okay, I've got that.
Leith-Links, the letters were sent out to particular consultees who were thought to have an interest in Leith or in history or culture, in Edinburgh heritage, etc. Those consultees' letters were sent to them on the 10th of December. So these letters gave these groups notice of the public information evenings, as well as providing information about the bill and the proposals themselves.
Could I possibly interrupt you just at that stage? So the consultation period lasted from 10th of December to the 7th of January, is that correct?
Well, it was the 23rd of November for the surplus fire fund proposals. That's when the letters went out there.
Could I ask you, did the council consider an extension to compensate for that holiday period? I mean,
I think it's fair to say that
anyone?
It's fair to say that the timing wouldn't have been ideal if there had been a bit more flexibility on time. The real driver, and again, no pun intended, but was the council meeting on the 31st of January, because of the need to have the council resolution before anything could be introduced. And of course, because it needed to be a meeting of the full council, those only happen on a monthly basis. So if that meeting had been missed, then that would have added another month to the timetable. And there was the main consideration of the timetable for, at that stage, the Ryder Cup and the impact that that would have on the Society's fundraising. With hindsight, I'm maybe skipping ahead a little bit here, but with hindsight, there actually would have been a lot more time to extend the consultation period, because after the Council's vote on the 31st of January, it then took quite a lot of time to go through the process of identifying the properties that should receive the notification letters. That was not expected. We expected to be able to do that much more quickly than was the case. If we had known that the notification letters wouldn't go out until they did, then the consultation process could have been a lot longer. And in an ideal world, that would have been preferable, but there were the sort of the timing considerations for that.
Thank you for that, and I think you've just kind of partly answered my next question about the problems of the notification. Obviously, that in hindsight, you feel that you would have changed that and done that differently. Was there any other action that you would have taken to rectify the situation?
I'm not sure that it could have been done quicker, simply because I think the delays in getting from the council resolution to the notification letters going out, it was a combination of, I think, using council systems to identify the properties that are not generally used for that sort of purpose, and also just some of the logistics of delivery. There was a very large number of properties that were affected. It was, I think, just under 400 properties around Leith-Links. So in terms of identifying those and the logistics of delivering to those, there was a lot of time added. It may be worth just adding, though, that in the earlier consultation period, there was a letter drop to more or less the same number of properties. It was the same principle of a letter drop to residents living around Leith-Links, and that those letters were provided on the 10th of December. So at the same time as letters went to the consultees such as Leith Trust, letters went out to, or a leaflet drop went to the residents around Leith-Links, telling them about the public information evening and also asking them to provide any views to the council by the 7th of January. And in addition to that, there was the advertisement that's required for private bills, and that appeared in the Scotsman and Evening News on the 11th and 18th of December. And again, it exceeded what is technically required in terms of the bill process by including information about the public information evenings, so people would have as much notice of those as possible. And there's also the notice that went up in the public libraries all around Edinburgh. In addition to that, for Leith-Links, and I know I've seen the written submission that's been received in respect to the consultation, but in addition to letters going to the properties that abut Leith-Links, those who use Leith-Links, for their benefit, there were notices put up on lampposts around and I think inside Leith-Links that gave information about the statue, that contained some photos of what the statue would look like and where it was proposed to be put. And I think that notice did appear on there's a sort of a park notice board. I think it also appeared in that. So there was a fair, although it was a short timescale, the consultation was designed to be as inclusive as possible, and I think it was fairly comprehensive in terms of the entire perimeter of Leith-Links, which, as you've seen, is quite a large area. But the entire perimeter, all of those properties were consulted and then later given the notification letter about the bill.
For your extremely comprehensive answer. Thank you.
Sorry, can I just, sorry just to be a bit boring about this, but can you just clarify the system that was used to identify who the affected persons were? I mean, was it just a matter of looking at a street map and highlighting the streets that you thought were affected, or is there some more sort of certain process that's undertaken to identify those people?
Well, the systems used to identify the properties were the council's geographic information system, and corporate address gazetteer data. Mr Buchanan can possibly give a little bit of explanation about those systems. But in terms of the ground rules that we adopted, we started with the principle that all of the properties either abutting or over a road from Leith-Links would receive a notification letter on the basis that there's only a very minor effect on any heritable property here. You know, this is not a bill that seeks to compulsorily purchase any property or anything like that. And the minimal impact would be, for example, looking out your window and seeing a statue. So that was the basis on which we decided that it should be those properties that either abut or are over the road from Leith-Links. So from that point, it was a case of effectively identifying the perimeter of the links using the council's systems to identify all of the addresses and then issuing intimation notices to those. The council took the view that it would have been very disproportionate, given the very limited impact on any property, that it would have been disproportionate to then go further and identify those who actually owned those properties. So on that basis, the notices were addressed to the owner-occupier of each property. And Mr Buchanan can potentially give a bit of explanation about those systems.
The gazetteer system records every property in Edinburgh against an address. It's not necessarily useful for identifying all those properties. It will give the number of properties in the street, or it will identify properties within the street or an area, but it doesn't necessarily show the properties that may overlook Leith-Links, for example. So that's when the GIS system comes into use, where staff could compare the gazetteer address list with properties that are actually adjacent to the links. There may be there are properties, for example, that overlook Leith-Links, but their address, their main entrance, is not on the links. It's another street. And just using a gazetteer system wouldn't pull those properties up. The address would be somewhere. So they use the GIS system to make sure they've captured all properties that look onto and abut Leith-Links. They then double check that when they're hand delivering letters to every single property around adjacent to the links, and they could then identify anomalies where a particular property may be slightly off the links but has a direct view of the links or the statue area. So they could then, and they did, include all those properties as well. So it's a sort of a three-layer of checking to make sure they've got every property that actually abuts the links.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you very much. Sandra.
Yes, please. Thank you, Convener. So you would be saying that you went over and above the usual neighbourhood notification that councils normally do, that properties within, 200 yards, I think it is, has to be identified. You went over and above the usual council notification?
Yes, I think the planning application, for example, properties within 20 metres of the area affected received notification there. So it was significantly over and above that received the notification letters and the earlier leaflet drop.
Sorry, Chair. Just to follow up another one. I know you had said to my colleague, it was a short time scale, and obviously that is of concern to, members of the public as well as others also. The letter was sent out on 23rd November for notification of meetings on the 19th and 20th of December during the Christmas period, obviously. It'd be interesting to know how many people actually turned up at these public meetings, given, the festive season. If you had figures for that, would be interesting. And can I also ask, we're talking about, you put obviously leaflets out, letters out, notices on lampposts and also newspapers, but this was to tell people that basically this was going to happen. Was there any consultation done at all about the idea of it may happen?
I think the consultation was expressed as proposals. The exception would be the advert that appeared in the Scotsman and the Evening News, because that has to follow the specific wording that's in the annexes for the private bill process, where it was expressed as an intention. But otherwise, I think it was expressed as a as a proposal, so not as a fait accompli or anything like that. And it certainly did invite views to be provided to the council, gave a postal address and an email address. On the meetings themselves, those were the 19th of December, the Leith-Links proposals. So that meeting was attended, I'm reading from the promoter's memorandum here, 3 council officers, a representative of the Scottish Parliament Non-Government Bills Unit, 1 elected member of the council, 5 members of the Leith Rules Golf Society and 2 members of the public. The 20th December information evening on the fund proposals was attended by 3 council officers, 2 representatives of the Non-Government Bills Unit, 1 elected member of the council, 1 representative of EVOT, the transferee charity, 1 representative of EVOT's parent charity, and 1 representative of the Fire Brigades Union, and 1 member of the public. I think it's important to stress, perhaps, that those were information evenings, and that the main thrust of the consultation was giving people the opportunity to comment to the addresses that had been provided in all of the notices by email or by post. And the responses that were received to the letters that had gone out, there were 8 formal responses. Again, this is from the promoter's memorandum. So in Leith-Links, the Leith Trust was in favour of the proposal. Historic Scotland confirmed that it had no objection. There were two further responses that did raise concerns about the erection of the statue. They raised issues relating to the aesthetics of the statue and the landscaping, the risk of the statue being, or concerns about a risk of the statue being damaged or defaced, concerns about the surrounding area being in poor condition, and objections to the use of council funds on maintaining or repairing the statue. So I think the last 2 in particular were a misunderstanding about who was paying for the statue. I think a belief that it was coming from council's funds, although the consultation information had said that it was the society who would meet it. The aesthetics and the risk of damage or defacement, those are issues that are dealt with through the planning process. So I think the council took the view that because the bill doesn't say anything about the aesthetics of the statue or how it should appear, that those were not necessarily issues for this process. In relation to the fund proposals, there were 4 responses. The FBU and Firhill Community Council suggested, and I may cover this in the second panel. Should I leave that for the second panel? Okay.
You don't mind.
So those are the responses in relation to Leith-Links. But I think, as much as it's not ideal to run the consultation over the Christmas period, the thrust of the consultation was inviting written responses rather than necessarily the information evenings themselves.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you for the...
Okay, thank you. Can I sort of move on to look at the security of this statute and what considerations have been given to deal with, say, for example, antisocial behaviour and other issues which may arise because you're clearly creating a new seated area which might attract some unintended consequences like antisocial behaviour. I just wondered what considerations have been taken on board to try and address those concerns.
Yes, so the submission that's been made by Police Scotland to the committee, a submission in effectively identical terms was made to the council as part of the planning application process, so the council considered that through that process. There were no conditions placed on the grant of planning permission specifically as a result of that, but the permission did include an informative advising the society to effectively take on board what the police had said and consider how to deal with those. And Mrs Densler can perhaps comment on those.
Thank you. Yes, they're concerned about the bronze and the seating. I think the seating we will have to look at, and I think that's an issue that we'll have to work with the police on, and I understand that is being taken on board by CICL, the design team. And on the security aspect, did go back to the sculptor, and he said when you put concrete inside and steel reinforcing right down through into the base, that makes it a much more difficult task to try and pinch a bronze, that you can't just saw through it. So we are addressing these issues and will continue to address them.
Okay. And are there any potential issues for neighbouring properties, like, for example, the bowling club, in terms of still in connection with the security aspect to it? I mean, are there any concerns that they have or you have that they may be impacted in some way?
No, I have no knowledge of whether or not there are any concerns there. One of the bowling greens has now become a tennis court, or 3 tennis courts, I think, in fact. So there is more activity there, but I would think more activity means that it's a better security situation. And as Leith-Links develops and people use it that way rather than an antisocial behaviour type of use, we would hope it become increasingly secure there.
The bowling club was consulted and didn't raise any concerns about those issues.
Thank you very much. Do other members have any other? Yeah.
Sorry. Yes, can I ask a question? Obviously, you know, the letter from the police mentions that in the area that experience a high level of recorded crime and antisocial behaviour, and recommend that CCTV camera be put there. Have you any thoughts on that or any comments to make on that one?
The Police Scotland's recommendations were particularly relevant to the planning application. The bill here is seeking authority or permission to change the rules to allow the statue to be erected, not the large information panels which could give concern to police, or did give concern to Police Scotland per their response. There's a lot of CCTV across Edinburgh. It does serve its purpose in many cases. There are concerns about the level of CCTV. There is a cost to install it, maintain it, and monitor it. We need to continue to work with Police Scotland, as Pat Densler and colleagues will, as this develops. We would hopefully avoid the need for any CCTV, as Pat said, greater use of the area. It was just a bowling club adjoining it. There's now tennis courts reintroduced. The old tennis court area is now an allotment area. And part of the information for the statue being erected was onto the allotment notice board, so a lot of people coming and going and seeing what's happening. Getting more activity in the area. There's a petanque, if I've pronounced that correctly, the French version of bowls next to the tennis court area. So it's increasing the range of uses of the links, and the more people can come and use the area. If there's a statue there drawing visitors to Leith residents to visit it, more visitors to the Leith area, that can only benefit. I think we shouldn't avoid doing something because there's a risk of antisocial behaviour or crime. That occurs across Edinburgh, across Scotland, across the world. We need to deal with that rather than avoid having an investment improving an area because of a risk of that. And we are doing that. We're working, our community safety teams are working closely with the police, not only to enforce, but to educate, change behaviours, give alternatives, tennis, lots of activities on the links. So Police Scotland's comments are pertinent. We need to take them on board. We need to consider those. But a lot of the issues that they had with the planning application have now gone away, because those large information panels are not going to be constructed, creating a sort of a blind on you'll see on the image on it, sort of a screen in effect down the pathway. If someone wanted to hide behind them, they could do that. They're not going to be there. So
sorry, could you? I didn't hear that last bit. Did you say they weren't going to be there? The people,
they
the
aren't part of this bill.
Yes.
Yes. The bill is asking for the restriction to be lifted so the statue can be built on the links. It's not asking for another structure, the information panels. No, it's not asking. So, the bill isn't asking for that.
So what we're looking at is, obviously, for the bill is a statue.
The statue.
And the panels are another issue? Or it's not going to happen?
There will be some information panels around the statue, because the interpretation of the statue and the history is an important part of that. But the bill doesn't authorise something that might be sort of classed as a permanent monument. So to the extent that what you can see there is a sort of a concrete structure, that would potentially be caught by the restriction on putting permanent monuments in place from the 1991 order, because it's not accepted by this bill. So what's happening instead, or what is planned instead, is something more akin to the general notice boards that one sees around parks, that would be more of a temporary structure. So it wouldn't be that sort of fixed structure offering hiding potential that the police were worried about.
So, sorry to press this point, but you know, obviously the leaflet we have, etc. The statue there, very nicely landscaped, and then you have, which looks like the permanent concrete structure. This is out on here. You're basically saying that, obviously, two separate parts to the bill. The statue and that will go ahead under this private bill, and then we're talking about it's not going to be a permanent fixture for the notice boards. It's just going to come and go, basically.
It's not that it will come and go. It's that it won't be, for legal purposes, it won't be a permanent structure of concrete or anything like that. It will be, you know, like the sort of notice boards that you see that are wood and plastic or something like that. That's still, because it's not part of the bill, that's something that would be effectively developed as the project progresses.
The quotation will go on for this extra bit.
Well, I think there will be interpretative panels of some sort, but they won't be as they appear in the flyer.
Sorry, I understand it's not to do with the private bill, but obviously I'm looking at it from the point of view of obviously the public and what's happening. But I take on board what you're saying, but thank you very much.
Do we understand? I'm right in what you're saying to us is that these panels, in terms of the restrictions that currently exist in Leith-Links, don't require any particular legislation to allow that to happen because of their a temporary nature.
Yes, exactly. Are there any examples?
Just so we get that on the record.
Not the panels we're looking at here.
Yeah, understand that.
Yes, a parks notice board, in effect, doesn't need.
Correct. Okay, that's.
Okay. Does that exhaust all of our questions? Yes. Okay. That's all of the questions we had to ask you. Do you have anything you wish to add which you feel has not been covered adequately this morning?
Want any more plans or things of that sort, or have you enough information?
We have enough. Yeah, we've got enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming this morning, and I suspend this meeting of this committee. Good morning. I'll now resume this meeting of the committee. I'd like to welcome our second panel of witnesses, this time dealing with the surplus fire fund provisions. The panel consists of Mrs Ella Simpson, Director of the Edinburgh Voluntary Organisations Council, Charles Livingston, Associate at Brody's, and Esmond Hamilton, the Finance Manager at City of Edinburgh Council. Good morning to you all. As before, we will be asking you a number of questions, and there will be an opportunity at the end to add anything which you feel has not been adequately covered during the questions session. And the first question is from my colleague, Mr Bruce Crawford.
Good morning. An interesting area in terms of the legal changes that need to be made here, in some ways quite complex. But could you provide us, though, with some details on why the private bill route was chosen and what alternatives were looked at as far as that process was concerned?
Yes, indeed. We're keen to take legal advice on how the matter should be properly handled. And we took that advice, and basically, in essence, the advice said that a trust fund or charity constituted by legislation can only be transferred or have its purposes changed by legislation. So we took that advice on board, and we were mindful of the fact that had we ignored that advice, then potentially the transfer had gone ahead without going round the legislation route. There might have been issues in the future of somebody claiming that the transfer or change of purposes wasn't legally or lawfully carried out. So we wanted to ensure that the process was done properly and in accordance with the advice that we'd taken.
Okay, but is it not true also to say that the Charities Trustees Investment Scotland Act 2005 provides a route that allows permission to be sought from OSCR to modify a fund's purpose and also transfer assets? And why was that route not looked at and chosen?
Yes, indeed, that is correct. And we are, if you like, conducting a twin-track approach. We have put in an application to OSCR used under the 2005 Act, but the advice that we did receive was that it was appropriate to go the legislative route as well. So, if you like, we're covering both bases.
And why wasn't that route in itself considered sufficient? And why then go to the next stage of requiring a private bill?
It's really based on the advice that we were given. And, you know, we have to take the advice. We're not legal experts ourselves, so that was the approach that was decided.
Okay, let me put that another way then. Is it true to say that had the council decided to follow only the Charities Trustees Investment Scotland Act route, because the council is not a charity, that in itself wouldn't have been sufficient to enable the process to be moved as you're requiring it to the Edinburgh Voluntary Organisation Trust?
Well, it's correct. The council is not a charity, though it is the trustee of the charity.
Right.
So that the distinction needs to be made on that point.
Okay.
Adds on those issues.
I'm afraid I can't comment on that. It wasn't advice that was received from Brody's. It was received from other solicitors before we were dealing with the private legislation, and the advice was received separately by the council before it came to us. So it's not something on which I can comment. I can though certainly direct the committee to paragraph 16 of the promoter's memorandum, which explains the basis on which the council took its decision. And certainly it was the council's view that the 2005 Act is quite complex in terms of its reorganisation provisions, but it was the council's view that the reorganisation under Section 39 of the Charities Act was not available because Section 42(5) of that Act states that Section 39 does not apply to any charity constituted under any enactment. So the fund was vested in the council by the Edinburgh Corporation Order Confirmation Act 1927. And Section 42(6) of the 2005 Act, it does say that Section 39, which is that's the reorganisation power. It says that will apply to a charity constituted by an enactment if it is an endowment, the governing body of which is a charity. But the council's approach was that the fund is an endowment, but the council is the sole trustee. So the council concluded that the governing body was not a charity. I can narrate that as the council's position. Certainly,
that's helpful. That gets it on the record. But can I also just for record purposes ask Mr. Hamilton? Did the council consider other approaches, and having considered these other approaches, consider that the route of the private bill route was the only route available to it?
Well, we weren't aware of any other potential approaches. I think it's important that you know that we did have a conference call with the Office of the Scottish Charity Regulator on the matter, and that involved the person giving us the legal advice, and there was a lengthy discussion over the finer points of the law, of which you've heard just previously. And clearly we're not experts in trying to fine-tune how the law should be interpreted. We have to, use our best initiatives to interpret our way through that and to do things that protect the council from the legal perspective.
But you are the promoters of the bill, and we've got a requirement to ensure that there was no other mechanism available, and that this was the only route that could have been used to achieve the aims that you wanted to achieve. I just want to get on record that you agree that that's...
Oscar's view was that it wasn't necessary to go down the legislative route. They were happy for us to go by the 2005 Act and use that route alone. But, having taken the legal advice and having heard the information that we've just been told about, we had to take a view as to what we were going to do.
So my understanding is that the council's legal advice was contrary to Oscar's view, and the position that put the council in is narrated at paragraph 17 of the promoter's memorandum. Oscar may have been content to use its reorganisation powers under section 39, but if that was challenged, based on the council's view, there would be a risk that would be found to be unlawful, and that would make any actions taken by the council or EVOT in respect of the funds unlawful. And so I think it was a risk-based approach that the council
based on the council's view that they were a sole trustee and not a charity, and therefore couldn't use that mechanism. If Mr. Hamilton could just confirm that was the case.
That's the case.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruce. Sandra, you have some questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Convener. I won't go over the ground that my colleague has covered. I think we've got quite a lot of information from that in regarding EVOT. I think I'll move on regarding timescales and that as well. Can you tell me what prompted the council to revitalise the funding? What factors were considered in relation to the timing and introduction of the bill? And possibly more pertinent is, why is EVOT, and that's for people that don't know, which was me before I had to look it up, is Edinburgh Voluntary Organisation Council. Why is EVOT an appropriate body to take over the fund?
The first point on revitalising is maybe for Mr. Hamilton.
Revitalising. In terms of the surplus fire fund has quite a long history dating back to 1824, and it's fair to say that prior to the year 2000 it had gone into a state of dormancy, and obviously the council has been keen to try and ensure that its trust funds were effectively used, and in effect looking at the surplus fire fund now is a way that we can revitalise it and make sure that it's relevant for the future.
On the second part of the question about the timing of the bill, we covered in the first panel the timing considerations for the Leith-Links element of the bill. So the surplus fire fund element was really subject to those considerations. I think the decision in relation to the transfer, the issue came along at the time when the Leith-Links bill was already on the cards, if not already in preparation. So there was then the effectively efficiency gains that could be made for the council and for the Parliament in combining them into one bill, and then from that point the timing was driven more by the Leith-Links element than the surplus fire fund element, where I think there's no pressing timing considerations here. The change is viewed as an improvement, so to that extent it's the sooner the better, but there are no real deadlines here. And on EVOT, that's perhaps for Mrs Simpson.
Okay. Well, EVOT has a long history. We were founded in 1868, so we've got a long history of alleviating hardship within the city of Edinburgh. We run various grant programmes already. We have several restricted funds. We have very active trustees coming from both the sector, from the legal background, from financial investment background. So they meet very regularly. They have a very firm control over the workings of the trust. And we have a huge network of organisations that would be able to refer beneficiaries to us to this fund. So we'd actually capitalise on that existing network. We also work very closely with many organisations that we feel we would be able to bring into this a cooperative approach to working with people who have been impacted by fire. So working, for example, with Brethany Christian Trust to actually provide household goods. So there's a kind of a cumulative impact of something like this, both to the other charitable organisations, but more importantly to individuals.
Obviously, you have the experience and the breadth of network also. Just a very, very small question to Mr Livingston regarding revitalising the fund. The Fire Brigade Union, did they approach you to raise this issue as well?
I think that's probably actually a question for Mr Hamilton.
Yes, indeed. The Fire Brigades Union has a long association with the Surplus Fire Fund, obviously being firefighters. Going back to the previous information that I stated, the Surplus Fire Fund had gone into a state of dormancy like a lot of local authority charities, and it was their interest in the Surplus Fire Fund that stimulated its kind of rejuvenation. They sought legal advice as to what was happening with the Surplus Fire Fund. They contacted the council expressing their concerns that it had gone into dormancy. And at that point, the council agreed to bring it back into operation, and the FBU were invited to send a representative to the Pensions and Trust Committee when the Surplus Fire Fund business was discussed. And ever since that time, they've been very actively involved in the interests of the Surplus Fire Fund and trying to promote it. And I should say that their interest is one in terms of the sort of public interest, not narrowly in terms of firefighters.
Clarify that point for me. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sandra. Can I ask you about the purposes of the fund? And firstly, just if you could set out why the purposes have been expanded and also what factors were taken into consideration in terms of deciding what new purposes should be included.
Yes, indeed. As part of the process of due diligence with EVOT, we went through a period of discussions with them as to how they would propose to take the Surplus Fire Fund forward. And as part of that exercise, we noted that over recent years it had become increasingly difficult to actually utilise the money from the fund effectively, i.e. we weren't getting sufficient or hardly any applicants for benefit from private individuals. And indeed, over recent years, most of the money has been used for awards to the burns units at the Sick Kids Hospital and at Livingston. So we were interested in actually trying to utilise the money better in the future, and the way to do that is to re-examine the purposes. And the changes really can be summarised as follows. Firstly, there was originally a requirement for injuries to be serious, i.e. you couldn't be considered unless the injury was serious. So we've removed that restriction, so minor injuries or even psychological injuries can be considered rather than physical injuries. So that will allow additional people to apply. Secondly, there wasn't anything explicit that allowed help for damage to household contents or domestic premises. So we wanted, again, to allow further people to apply by having that widening in place. And then finally, we wanted to explicitly state that it was possible for money to be awarded to hostel burns units as well. So we wanted to cover all the practical uses that we could see in the future that would enable EVOT to make best use of the money in future.
Okay, thank you. Can I look at those in a bit more detail then? So there's been a decision taken to allow for compensation for damage, but structural damage is excluded. Could you give us a bit more on why that distinction and decision was made?
The reason was that the size of the fund is around about £1.25 million, which generates roughly about £25,000 to £30,000 of income a year. Had we opened it up to structural damage, then clearly one claim for structural damage could wipe out a whole year's income. So we thought that to use the money effectively and to get the best benefit across Edinburgh would be to restrict it to personal damage and the contents, etc.
And are all household contents covered, or are they restricted in some way?
No, potentially it would be for the discretion of the trustees to decide in the circumstances. I mean, clearly, in some cases, people will have insurance; in other cases, they won't. As part of EVOT's role in the future will be to examine the circumstances and to decide appropriately how the money is used.
So basically, you can see the fund now compensating people for damage where they've not taken out their own home buildings or contents insurance.
Potentially so. I mean, Ella can comment on that further, I think, she's in touch with the sector.
Our aim would be to target specifically people who are earning the living wage or below that. So we're looking at people who are on some level of benefit or who are in fairly low paid work. With that living wage would be reviewed every year to see if there's any adjustment, because that tends to be the people who are caught in poverty while they're in work. And as always, when people are in poverty, it's those things that you think you might be able to do without that you stop. So things like household insurance are the things that are seen as the fringe benefits that they can't afford at the moment. So that would be our target.
Okay, thank you. The scope of the fund has been changed to cover the district of City of Edinburgh Council. That change, does that exclude anybody from being eligible for applying to the fund, or is it just how do you think that change is going to impact on potential people?
It isn't actually a change. As I think I stated earlier, the genesis of the charity was the series of fires in 1824 in the High Street in Edinburgh, and at that time £11,000 was collected, and the money was used to assist the people that had suffered in that fire. So that restriction is currently in the existing legislation, i.e. it has to be Edinburgh-based fires that will be assisted. From our previous work with OSCA, we know that they do, like charities, to try and adhere to geographic restrictions if at all possible. Had we found out there was no longer any possibility of getting potential claimants from Edinburgh, then we would have been allowed to have widened it up to the whole of Scotland or the UK. But as we know there's still fires in Edinburgh, then OSCA wouldn't be happy about us widening it.
Okay, thank you. Given there's now going to be potentially more people able to claim from this fund, are you confident the fund is going to be able to sustain these additional payouts?
We manage our funds very carefully, and we will make sure that what we're doing is we're apportioning them across the year. It's a new fund, so therefore I think in the first year it probably will take a bit of work to actually get the publicity out to make sure that the potential referrers understand what the restrictions on the fund are. But I would suggest that because we're opening it up to psychological damage as well as to property and physical injury, then I think then we will most definitely have enough applicants to use the fund to its full, but I wouldn't suggest that we would have too many. We also, sorry, just so you know as well, we run other funds as well, so that if there was an issue about not being quite able to cover something, then we would obviously use both or 2 or 3 streams of our funds to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the people who were applying.
Very helpful. Thank you. Anne, do you have a question?
Yeah. Really, it would be to Mr Livingston again, and it was really just a similar question that I asked you earlier, but obviously this is a different topic. Can you explain the ground rules that determined who the affected persons were for the consultation?
Yes. So there's obviously no effect on any property here, so there's no notification. It was just the consultation process. But the consultees who received letters in respect of the fire fund proposals were effectively a number of bodies who were connected with charities or connected with fire or connected with financial management. So the letter went to Lothian and Borders Fire and Rescue, as they then were their headquarters. It went to two of the council's own directors. It went internally to the Director of Children and Families and the Director of Services for Communities. It went to EVOT. It went to the Fire Brigades Union, the Scottish Federation of Housing Associations, the Sick Kids Hospital and the Burns Unit of St John's Hospital in Livingston. Went to Audit Scotland, the Edinburgh Tenants Foundation, Foursquare, Oscar and every community council in the council area. So that was really an attempt to capture everyone who had who we thought would have an interest in the fund, either as a fellow charity or as a potential beneficiary. There was also notices put up in every, or at least notice was sent to Lothian and Borders Fire and Rescue with a request that it be put up in every fire station within the area. Our understanding is that that did happen. And there was, of course, also the required notices in newspapers about the fire fund area.
The consultation period, how long did that last?
Well, the letters went out on the 23rd of November, and the notice for fire stations was also was sent out to sent out with the request to put it up on the 23rd of November as well, and it was the same period for providing comments, so the 7th of January, again driven by the desire to have the proposal voted on at the 31st of January council meeting.
Was there any responses received?
Yes, there were. So there were 4 responses. They all supported the proposals in principle, although I should probably clarify that to say that Oscar, as we've discussed, Oscar didn't agree with the necessity of the private legislation route. I won't reopen that issue, but they have approved the change through a separate process in the 2005 Act, so they're content with the proposals. The Fire Brigades Union and Firhill Community Council suggested that the residence condition not apply to the purpose of making awards or grants to people who have rendered meritorious services in connection with a fire in the City of Edinburgh Council area, on the basis that a professional firefighter, for example, might live in East Lothian or Mid Lothian, but still provide heroic service within the Edinburgh area. So the feedback on that was to remove the residence restriction for that, and the council agreed with that. So the residence restriction now applies only to the injury and the property damage purposes.
Thank you. Thanks, Convener.
I think we just noticed how the intent behind the bill was notified to both EVOT and the FBU. But I think it would be helpful to understand if you could describe to us how their consent was actually determined and obtained both from EVOT and from the FBU. Simply notifying them of something. What process did they go through in their own organisations to get consent for?
What I think
think they were both instrumental in driving the changes, not just responding to them. The FBU's role, Mr. Hamilton can maybe speak to, and then Ms. Simpson on EVOT's role.
Yes, indeed. I've already explained how the FBU came involved with the Surplus Fire Fund. The Council's been keen to ensure their support throughout the process of transferring the Surplus Fire Fund to an external charity, and they have been involved in discussions with EVOT, and they've expressed their content with EVOT as a recipient of the Surplus Fire Fund. So we're very happy with their support for the proposal.
And it may be worth mentioning as well that the FBU's role in attending meetings where the fire fund is discussed, that's set out in the legislation, but that's not new. That happens with the current council meetings of that. So the legislation is preserving that for when the fund is transferred to EVOT. But EVOT's involvement, Mrs. Simpson can comment.
This was discussed at probably three of our trustees' meetings, just discussed very fully about what we would want to be taken on to make sure that we would have the network and the structures to reach the people who should be the beneficiaries. We thought about this very thoroughly because we would never take on anything that had a restriction on it without being very clear that we could fulfil those restrictions. And we wondered if we would need to do any further recruitment as trustees to make sure we were able to do that, but that was allayed by the fact that the Fire Brigade Union would be present at any of our committee meetings that were discussing these. We looked at the administration of it in terms of volume. Did we have the capacity? Were we able to work this through? And the requirement for the trust administrator to take things forward. So it was very thoroughly discussed at committee meetings, and we had very productive meetings both with Mr Hamilton and with the Fire Brigade Union representatives.
Very helpful just to understand some of the processes that have been going on. And I think that pretty clearly identifies that there's been a strong process to involve people in the process, so that's helpful. A slightly more technical matter on whether powers have been transferred or conferred in this bill process, and maybe Mr Livingston could give us his view on whether the bill doesn't or does not confer powers on EVOT. Rather than transfer, because I know there's an issue about that, but I'm not sure I fully understand it all, if I'm being honest.
I'm not sure I entirely follow it, but I'll give it a go. I don't think it's conferring any powers on EVOT in terms of giving them the ability to do anything that they cannot already do, which that would be how I would interpret a conferring of powers. Certainly, it's transferring. So it transfers property rights, interests, and liabilities of the fund. So that's intended to transfer effectively the entirety of the fund's existence. So although the council isn't aware of any liabilities, to the extent that any organisation may have potential liabilities that they're not aware of at the time, those will be transferred across. EVOT will, of course, then hold the property. They'll have the ability to pursue any rights that the fund currently has. For example, if it had a claim against somebody else, they would have to deal with anything coming out of a liability from the fund. And it places restrictions on what EVOT can do with the property. But there's no conferring of any powers on EVOT, as I would interpret that term.
A good job of explaining that, so thank you very much.
Just to clarify on that point, the powers, are there any powers conferred on the FBU?
No, on the basis that the Section 4 deals with the FBU. It does allow them to nominate two individuals, but that's not an innovation. It's a continuation of the existing process that's used with the council.
And they attend meetings, these nominees?
Yes, Mr. Hamilton can maybe explain that.
Yes.
Thank you. Anne?
Thank you. The Scottish Parliament and as a committee, we must consider the human rights implications of the bill. Could I ask then, first of all, Mr Hamilton, what account has the Council taken of the requirements of the European Convention of Human Rights law in drafting the bill?
I think that would be more a appropriate question for Charles, being our legal expert on the bill and the drafting of it.
Yes, so I have had fairly lengthy exchanges with Parliament solicitors on this that are perhaps available for the committee if needs be, but I don't believe any convention rights are engaged by the bill. It's hard to explain that because it's effectively trying to prove a negative, but if there are particular rights, I could address those, if there's anything in particular.
The other question, you'll be glad to hear, it's probably one of the last questions. Are you aware of any amendments which may be required to the bill, whether for tidying it up or to give effect to any of the other issues?
There's nothing that the Council or I think has been missed in terms of its original drafting. Obviously, if there were any concerns that the committee had about the bill, for example, going back to part 1, if there were concerns about making the ability to construct the statue more geographically restricted within Leith-Links, if the committee had any concerns about those, then we could, of course, suggest amendments at consideration stage.
Thank you. That's all I've got, Convener.
Joanne, I don't have any more questions. Do my colleagues have anything else they would like to ask? Okay, I think that concludes our questions. Do any of you have anything further you would like to add which has not been adequately covered during this question session? Okay, well, thank you all for coming. It's been very, very useful to have you here today. Thank you. It was decided earlier that item 3 on the agenda would be taken in private, so I'm now going to suspend the public session of this committee. Thank you.